love to welcome you. We're thrilled that you're here. We're delighted to have the Amistad Foundation Center here, and to have Mr. Benjaminson, and help me with your last name.
Erica Bryan.
Erica Bryan. So this is great. We've been looking forward to this for a while. Right now, I'd love to introduce you to Olivia White from the Amistad Center.
Hi, we have a nice small group, it's going to be great for those of you who are Motown enthusiasts as I am, and I know we have a couple of singers here, backup singers. Well, we should be backup singers. I think we were trying to be in the front. We should be backup singers, but it's really great. I was reading Essence magazine one night, and we'd already thought about having this authors program. The Amistad Center had already thought about it, and there was on one of the What's Hot Now pages was a note about this book that had just come out about Mary Wells, and I said we must have it. We must have it. And I emailed Peter right away, and he emailed back right away. And it's just wonderful because I know a lot of us feel that Motown is really the soundtrack of our lives. And Mary Wells was actually the first female vocalist who was a star there, as you will find out. So it's just really an honor to have Peter here and Erica. So the Authors at Amistad program, this is actually our second event. The first one was at the museum at the Wadsworth Athenaeum where we're housed. And it was with Rachel Swarms, who wrote American Tapestry, which is the story of Michelle Obama's family. So the next Authors at Amistad program will be at the museum again on Juneteenth Family Day, June 8th. And that will be with Rita Williams Garcia, who has written 2 children's books. And then the final event in this series is on September 26th, and that will be at St. Joseph's College. And that will be with a young African-American mystery writer, Attica Locke. She's just written 2 books, and she's going to be interviewed by Karen Grigsby Bates, who is an NPR correspondent and also a mystery writer. So it should be a great program. That'll be at the Hoffman Auditorium at the University of St. Joseph. So we look forward to seeing you there. So I'm going to introduce our speakers today, and there'll be a conversation for about 45 minutes. And then, since it's so intimate, all of you can get your questions answered, I'm sure. So let me just start with Peter, and I'm going to read his glowing resume that he sent me by email.
Oh, no.
So Peter Benjaminson was born in Washington, D.C. and was a reporter and city-county bureau chief for the Detroit Free Press from 1970 to 76. While at the Free Press, he wrote the book Investigative Reporting with Dave Anderson, the first how-to book in that field. It was in print for 20 years. In 1979, he wrote The Story of Motown, the first U.S. book ever written about the Motown record company. From 1979 to 1981, he was a reporter for the Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He taught journalism at Binghamton University, New York, and Columbia University from 1981 to 91. In 1984, he wrote Death in the Afternoon, America's big city newspapers' struggle for survival, the first and only book about the death of afternoon newspapers in America's big cities. In 1992, he wrote Published Without Perishing, and in 1997, he wrote Secret Police Inside the New York City Department of Investigation. From 1991 to 1994, Peter was the spokesman for the New York City Department of Investigation, which I am not sure I know what that is, so that might be the first question. He was assistant editor of the Chief Leader newspaper in New York City from 1994 to 1998, and the spokesman for the New York City Correction Officers Benevolent Association from 1998 to 2003. In 2003 and 2009, he was the spokesman for Members for Change in New York City Teamsters Local 237. Wasn't that Jimmy Hoffa's?
Not
Do you know
as
where
local.
Jimmy Hoffa is? Do you know where? Is that part of your investigation?
I'm sorry, but I can't speak at this time.
In 2008, he wrote The Lost Supreme, The Life of Dream Girl Florence Ballard. We're here to talk about his book about Mary Wells, but before we do that, one of the challenges of having a book program is to really find interesting interviewers, people who can be engaged with the author and really bring the author out and and have a personal interest in the subject matter. And with Rachel Swartz, of course, we had Dr. Pamela Trotman-Reed do the interview, and of course she's known for her knowledge of African American history as well as psychology, so it was a great interview. So it dawned on us, what better interview could you have than a fellow musician, but from another generation, to really have some texture in terms of the subject matter. So with us today we have Erica Bryan, who's a student at the Hart School at the University of Hartford. So let me just read her bio quickly. Erica Bryan is a jazz vocalist and composer from Middletown, Connecticut, currently studying at the Hart School of Music in West Hartford, Connecticut. Erica first began her formal training in music at the age of 9. From then on, working in various choirs, ensemble groups, and competitions. At 15, she was officially introduced to learning and performing jazz and composition at her arts high school, which propelled her into the new world of musical exploration. Now working with 2 musical groups of varying genres, the Human Race and West End Blend, as well as with various members of the Hart School community around New England, Erica continues to look for new ways and opportunities to perform, compose, and express her musical style to all who come to enjoy. So with that, I give you Erica and Peter, and enjoy the conversation.
All right, so as Ms. Lydia White mentioned, I'm here with Mr. Peter Benjaminson to discuss your book on Mary Wells. So I'd like to know, first off, how you got into, just writing and your exploration of, nonfiction. You seem to be a specifically nonfiction writer, and where your interest in classic R&B and Motown came from.
That's a good chance to make sense of that disjointed resume that I set up here. What really happened was I always wanted to be a book author, and I was a reporter for the Detroit Free Press, and this is I know it's before most of you were born, but Woodward Bernstein toppled President Nixon from office, and they said they used investigative reporting to do it. So another reporter and I said, geez, we got to find out what this investigative reporting is. And we went, this is long pre-computer. The only computer around was in a research facility in Utah somewhere. So we went to the library and looked up investigative reporting and found there were no books on it. So the two of us decided to write a book, which, as the resume says, was in print for 20 years. It was a big seller. So I thought, geez, this is the way to go. But I'm in Detroit now, so what else is unique about Detroit? And I looked at the auto industry, but that was certainly unique or semi-unique, but that had been done to death by a number of other authors. So the only other thing that appealed to me was really unique about Detroit, was the Motown record company. I was lucky to meet Flo Ballard. I was sitting in the city room of the Free Press one day, and the editor told me that they just heard that Florence Ballard of the Supremes was on welfare, which that would be like hearing now that Joe Biden had been on food stamps for the last 4 years while he was holding federal office. So it was a big story, and I got in touch with Flo. I did a story about her. The response to the story about her being on welfare was a very sympathetic one. People thought, instead of the nasty reaction that she had feared, the reaction was, how can we help you? We thought you were living really well in Florida or somewhere, so what can we do for you? So she invited me back to her house on weekends and evenings to tape her 8 hour, what turned out to be 8 hours of her story for the first, or I should say the second book I wrote on the Motown Record Company, which was The Lost Supreme. But the problem, there was a big problem I taped her in 1975, which was a year before she died in 1976. Then there was a 30-year break before I could actually sell the idea of the book to a publisher. The only way I could sell the idea was because the Dreamgirls movie came out and showed there was a commercial market for this kind of story. So, my hair used to be black. I had a whole different job. I wasn't married. Now I'm getting way up there. I'm actually out of my 20s. But I was able to produce the book on Flo Ballard. that did so well that the same publisher immediately asked me what other book I could do, and I decided to do the Mary Wells book, basically because right after I did the Lost Supreme book, a guy called me and said, Peter, you know, I loved your book on the Lost Supreme, but what about a book on Mary Wells? I actually got angry with him because I said, look, do you want me to do the same book but the names changed? I mean, another African-American girl from the Detroit ghetto goes to Motown, does really well, and then doesn't do so well afterwards. And I got mad at him, but he held it together and told me about the 100 or so differences between the Mary Wells story and the Flo Ballard story. And that made the book very interesting to me, and I hope it'll make it all interesting to you. Tell me if I'm going too fast, but go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I noticed that you, just from what you said, you enjoy writing about that which hasn't been explored as much. And I noticed when I was like doing my search on some information, just, you know, about Motown, about the Supremes, you know, the collection isn't as wide as you might expect. So, you know, thank you for writing about this, like giving us this information, this bio that, you know, we might not otherwise have, you know, known about.
Oh, it's nice of you to thank me, but it's also good to be the first in any field. Then there's no competition, and I can sort of set the ground rules. So it's partly selfish and partly selfless. But actually, I'm glad I was able to rescue the stories of both Flo Ballard and Mary Wells for history, because I thought they were both admirable people, and they strove forward, especially Mary, endless decades of trying to either get to the top or get back to the top. And I thought they were both, especially Mary, was an admirable person who should have a book written, really deserved to have a book written about her. Right. Hopefully there'll be others, but this is a start. Sorry.
Right, no. So, of course, as you mentioned in detail, Mary Wells had an incredibly dramatic life, which could be compared to a soap opera, pretty much. You know, the quick rise, like immediately after, you know, going from taking care of her mother, never really having much of a childhood, to, you know, immediately being thrust into this world of superstardom, and then, you know, leaving Motown, falling from the spotlight, getting into, you know, drugs, and you know, trying to make her comeback and find that spotlight again. You know, what were some of your experiences while uncovering, you know, her story? What, you know, surprised you, didn't surprise you, like in a general sense?
Well, I guess I knew it before, but one thing that always strikes me about rock stars, especially, well, maybe especially in Motown, but probably in other places, about how young they are when they have to make major decisions. She decided to be a singer at age maybe 14. Then she tried to get into various musical groups, all male groups, which wouldn't have her. The guys wanted her in there, but the band leader figured that it would be disruptive because there'd be 4 guys and then Mary, and she's very attractive. So anyway, she made the decision to get into music. Then she signed a contract with Motown while she was still underage, so underage that her mother had to co-sign the contract to make it legal. Then by the time she made the very momentous decision to leave Motown, she was the ripe old age of 21, when I know at age 21 I wasn't making major decisions that I did very well at, and she didn't do very well at them either. But you know, in a lot of other careers, you start off early, you work your way up, gradually you get to know more about what's happening in whatever field you're working in. Then you can still screw up things, but you at least have knowledge that allows you to possibly make the right decision. She didn't, and that's true of a lot of rock singers, because they're so young that it's really like children trying to decide what they're going to do for the rest of their life.
That absolutely surprised me, reading that she was only 21 when she was going through a divorce. Right. And, you know, making the choice to leave Motown as she did, you know, with very little experience. I am not even 21. So that's you know, that just goes to show times, I guess, were different.
Yeah, well, even now, well, I'm not sure about now. Music has turned a whole new road. I was trying to combine road and route, didn't work. But But what did really surprise me about her was her determination, which kept going in spite of her ups and downs in life. I mean, you talked about her going through her divorce. She had a bad childhood. Her father was mostly absent. Her mother worked as a house cleaner. Whenever the father came home, he'd beat up on the mother. So she had 2 brothers, but they were more or less absent. So she didn't have a good model for a family. But when she decided she was going to get married, which was about age 19, she actually investigated her prospective husband's family. I mean, her first husband was Herman Griffin, who was a vocalist and band leader of Motown. But Mary, instead of just taking him at face value, went over to his father's house and talked to his father, basically interviewing the father to see how he grew up and what kind of husband he had been insofar as she could tell. And she thought he was a nice guy, the father, and so she married Herman, which turned out to be a mistake. But at least she tried to do things right. And then she married either formally or informally 2 more times, each time trying to get a better person. Finally she got someone who was fairly compatible with her and stayed with her till her death. But it just shows she wasn't going to stop and settle for second or third best. She was going to move on. She did that in her career too. She thought that Motown was shorting her on money and possibly on an artistic level. So she left them and went on and on. And even though she didn't do so well after she left Motown, she did better than people thought she did, but she didn't do as well as she had been. She still kept going. On her deathbed, she was telling the doctor what she was going to sing on her next tour. So she was never, ever, ever going to give up on anything. It's really, that's what really amazed me about her.
So moving into her life in Motown itself, you know, she obviously had to deal with Berry Gordy's ambition, which was fierce from the very start, from, you know, a very young age. So, you know, eventually she paired with Smokey Robinson, who I didn't even realize was such an incredible songwriter and was basically like, you know, that torch that kind of built her up through her years in Motown, and, you know, who she worked with to write all of these hits. How would you say her life was affected by Smokey Robinson, you know, within the business, outside of the business?
Well, let me back up for a minute and point out how they worked at Motown. They had they were all influenced. Anyone in Detroit at that time, they always had a default job. You could get a job in on the auto line if you didn't have anything else to do, which was actually a pretty good situation. But that means everyone was associated or had memories of the auto business. And Motown was across the street from General Motors headquarters. So they had these 2 huge buildings towering over it. And everybody was always talking about cars. So they essentially had a production line system at Motown, and what I call a 2-gear system. That is, they had the songwriters and producers on one gear and the vocalists on the other gear. And instead of, at other companies, people would pick favorites and pair people just for not necessarily good reasons. At Motown, they moved the 2 gears like this. They went all around, but my hands can't do that. The songwriters and producers on one gear and the singers on the other gear, and they'd see who worked together well. That is, who produced songs that went up on the chart. If they didn't do well after a couple of songs, the gears would click on. They'd click back and forth, and they'd click around and around until they got the right songwriter with the right singer. And this happened with Mary. Her first songwriter was Mickey Stevenson. Then she went to Holland Dozier Holland, who had worked well with the Supremes but didn't do that well with her. And finally she ended up with Smokey Robinson. And his influence on her life was they basically had a mind meld. They worked, in terms of songwriter and singer, they worked together perfectly. He knew exactly what kind of songs that she could sing at the beginning, it seemed. Or he certainly did after writing a couple of songs for her, and her songs continued to go up the charts. You know, the others, with Holland Dozier Holland and Mickey Stevenson, she'd have a couple of hits and then fall off. a couple of hits and then fall off. With Smokey, he started in the middle and just more or less directly went right up to the top of the chart with My Guy. I think it is something, Smokey had a good feel for writing songs for women. He's very sensitive, and he was married for a long time. He was just the right kind of person for her. But he didn't work well with the Supremes. Holland Dozier Holland was the really good songwriters for the Supremes. Smokey was sort of second rate for them. So I think it just depends on exactly where their minds are.
Mm-hmm. So I guess working with Berry Gordy must have been a trip, pretty much. So how would you say, how would you say she worked with Berry Gordy? Did she do you find that she knew where his head was at most of the time, or do you think that she more intended to kind of just follow his lead, or did they really have a very close relationship?
Well, I think
That's one thing I don't think I understand too well.
I think she sort of divined or had the sight of what he really needed, because she basically forced herself on him as a singer. He was writing songs for Jackie Wilson. He had been writing songs for Jackie Wilson. And what she wanted to do actually was write a song that he would give to Jackie Wilson. But he was she didn't know that just a few months before he had stopped writing songs for Wilson because of a royalties dispute. So she cornered him basically at the nightclub in Detroit, the 20 grand, and insisted that he either give her an appointment so he could listen to the song she'd written, or listen to it right there. And he was very annoyed. He was going between two groups that were performing in different parts of this large nightclub. And he said, look, okay, I can't take this anymore. Just sing it right here. Mm-hmm. She sang it, which is no backup band, no backup singers, nothing. And he was like, whoa, this is exactly, I could see him thinking, I wasn't there, but I could see him thinking, this is exactly what I need. I need a female solo singer. Motown didn't have one. Well, they had several people who were trying to make the grade, but they hadn't made the grade, and she was really very good. So he immediately called her mother, or had her call her mother, and they both came down the next day and they signed a contract. As far as working later was concerned, what he really wanted was hits. People make fun of him for putting a banner on the house that he was using as the Motown headquarters, and it said Hitsville on it, which seems like just boasting, except he meant it very specifically. What he meant was that every record they put out, actually distributed, had to be a hit, in his opinion. He meant top 100 hit, but he would have gone for top 10 hit every time. But that's very unusual in the Motown industry, in the music industry, to put out hits all the time. Usually it's just scatter fire. Maybe one does it. At his best, he had 2/3 of the records he distributed were hits, which is really quite something. It was the only way, without sufficient capital, that he could keep the music company going that he had produced. So he loved her as boss and employee as long as she was producing hits, and that's what she was doing all the time. It was a Motown. So after she left and basically threatened this company with ruin because she was still their only female solo superstar, he didn't like her anymore. So it was just commercial up and down.
Yeah, that actually seems to be the flow of his character, because I've noticed in the book you mentioned briefly, you gave a little bit of information about Berry Gordy's life before Motown, how he owned or managed a jazz record store that was like a modest success, and then eventually it, the whole business went bankrupt, and from then on he decided, okay, I'm only going to produce hits, things that people enjoy. I enjoy jazz, but okay. So it's interesting that, once he found his girl and once he found his songwriter, paired them together, he expected them to be hit machines.
Right.
And, given that, I wanted to ask you, being a singer and a composer at the Hart School, you know, we're taught to be as creative as possible and think as creatively as possible. And, you know, while still being exposed to the real world of, you know, possible financial instability, you know, after we graduate. So as a writer, you know, how do you feel about art for art's sake in a world of commercialism?
Well, I used to teach a freelance writing course, if you're talking about writing. Sure, you can do it. One of my friends in high school, you may know his name, Greil Marcus. He wrote books on rock music, but his parents left him a trust fund, so he does anything he wants. I, unfortunately, I'll get those guys. They didn't leave me a trust fund. So they're very nice to me, but I still had to work all my life. So I guess I don't know, it depends on the person. If you want to just do stuff that you like, then you'll have to get whatever you want for eating somewhere else, unless you're real lucky. Other than that, you have to do what Gordy did, which was, you know, he really had you just mentioned it, he had a significant, almost religious experience when his jazz store went under. That was not supposed to happen. And it was like, he was really, all his friends said he was really blasted that the store would go under. The people didn't like his taste. So he really made it's almost like a conversion in the field to, I will only do what people want. So they watched each record carefully to see what groups it appealed to, and very often, Motown and other record companies do this. If they put out, well, for instance, there was a song put out by another record company called "Get a Job." So he immediately, he saw how popular it was. He put out "Got a Job," you know, and then then Martha Reeves put out, I think it was "Heat Wave." And then he immediately put out another record that sounded almost exactly like it with another title. You know, that works, this'll work. You know, it's very Hollywoodish. But, you know, Hollywood makes a lot of money, and that's how they do it, you know. Let's say the movie Bridesmaids, the movie Star Wars, they both made a lot of money, so let's put them together. We'll have bridesmaids in space, you know, whatever. Now, sometimes I'm burlesquing it. Sometimes it doesn't, they wouldn't do that. But if it works once, it'll work again. And you know, how many sequels have there been to Star Wars? So Gordy got on the same wavelength.
He also wrote a tune himself called "Money, That's What I Want."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was good.
Which was, I think, re-recorded by Mary Wells.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's interesting.
No, I thought just from, I didn't do his biography. Everybody's waiting until he dies to do his biography. And you know, it's not as nasty as it seems, because we were just talking about the fact that dead people can't sue. So once a person dies, you can do anything you want. But I don't think anyone would be unfair necessarily. Well, some people would be, but it's nice with a dead person in that sense, because you can tell the truth about what they did without them suing you for, you know, I didn't have sex outside of my marriage. I never smoked anything. You know, that's what they'd say in court, and it'd be hard to disprove it.
Based on your research, would you say that, you know, a lot of, as a follow-up question, would you say that a lot of the artists of the era, you know, shared his same view about only producing hits, only, you know, things that people enjoyed, like within the Motown era? Was that, would you say that was resounding?
The artist didn't really have much of a choice in that time. In the 60s and 70s, it was just like the Hollywood studios were, you know. Gordy would say, he'd have them produce, he'd say, look, we've got 15 songs written for you. Go record them, and then we'll listen to them and see what we think. And then all the Motown executives would gather around and listen to these songs. And Gordy's standard question was, this is what a sandwich for lunch would cost $1, and so did a record. So he'd say, would you buy that record for $1 or buy a sandwich instead? Then they'd vote, you know, and if the sandwiches won, they wouldn't put it out. Let's take Holland Dozier Holland, for instance. They're creative artists in the sense that they were songwriters. They eventually left Motown and founded a couple of other record companies. I think, I've forgotten the name of them offhand. Maybe Buddha was one of them. But there they put out the records they just wanted to put out. And it failed pretty quickly because their taste wasn't necessarily everyone else's taste. Gordy knew that his personal taste wasn't necessarily everyone else's taste either. That's why he had all these different people sitting around in some meeting. It was basically a focus group before its time. These people sitting around deciding, voting on what was a more popular sound. Then he put that one out. Even if he didn't like it, it didn't matter to him. He liked it when it made money. And I was saying that she said that he wrote this song, Money, That's What I Want. I mean, from a biographer's point of view, if I was ever going to be his biographer, I mean, that was, you know, very few people in life announce what they're going to do before they do it. Maybe Alexander the Great, and a couple other people. But to say money, that's what I want, you know, it's like, thank you, that's what you want to do. Okay, good. But he let other people come in too. There were people who'd hang around at Motown hoping to get a job, so he'd invite them in. And anyone who was hanging out on the porch just to. So I guess it was an unscientific but workable focus group.
So okay, so Berry Gordy basically had the dream team at this point. You know, they're moving right along, they're making the hits, and they're #1, and Mary Wells is being seen as this incredible star. How is she dealing with the rivalries that may have been forming within the industry? You know, because she's seen as the queen at this point.
Right.
No.
Well, she started out being real nice, and in fact, she was really nice, but not eventually, she was only in Motown for, I guess, 4 years, 5 years maybe. And she became diva-like in that she was never really nasty to people, but she'd have an entourage of 30 people, you know, and was always dressed up. And she couldn't park her car or have her driver park her car in front of Motown and then try to get in, because mobs would be waiting there to get her autograph. And so they'd have security guards who, you know, fend off the fans, just like Beyonce probably. And she couldn't move anywhere, she couldn't go shopping. So eventually it went to her head, but it didn't go to her head well, it did go to her head in one sense, but she was never that arrogant. The only people she was nasty to were people who really made mistakes. People in the band who played the wrong notes and made her sound bad.
She's a perfectionist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, she was with herself too. And those people, the band's people, she was paying them, so they were supposed to do the right thing. If they didn't show up or something, or
she let them know too.
Right. So
I'm paying you, so
yeah, right.
That
So
may have been where that diva attitude came from.
Yeah.
Though, you know, you say it very, very kindly. You know, that her perfectionism contributed to this this idea that people had of her as, you know, of being a diva, like one of the original divas.
I guess, although I don't think she had time enough or publicity enough to really get into true recent diva land, because it was only, well, the press, she didn't have many press clippings. At the time, the press was basically white-owned, and it didn't cover black singers that much.
Right.
So she wasn't, in Detroit, certainly she was well-known, but probably not even by white Detroiters. So it was basically black Detroiters who knew her, and in that environment she was diva-like, but outside of that she couldn't be because no one knew who she was. In fact, in '64, she was staying in the one of the big hotels in New York, and you can read this in the book. The book has 300 pages packed with great anecdotes. Let me just put it in the commercial there. But her ex-husband, Herman Griffin, got into a gunfight with her business manager, Robert West, and shot him in the head, almost killing him. I'm amazed that he survived, in fact. The bullet went into his head above his left eye and blinded him up in that eye. But, and the police were called. It was a major hotel. It was in the middle of Manhattan. And I was looking frantically through the microfilm of the New York Post, New York Daily News, and so on. And it was way down. It wasn't even on the front page. And it didn't even use her name in the headline. It had something like shooting incident at a hotel, you know, and then in like paragraph 7, it said, Mary Wells, the rock singer, was also in the room. I mean, can you imagine if that happened to Beyonce now? I mean, the Post would sell itself for the next 2 weeks of like, where was she? You know. So people weren't paying that much attention.
Go ahead, sir.
So despite her superstar lifestyle, yes, she seemed to have been a very introverted person, you know, which I noticed was very interesting. I can actually relate to that in a lot of ways. But yeah, like following like these tragedies that happened with like various love affairs and whatnot, she, you know, she just kind of became really removed, and as her best friend was saying, Mae James Holler, as she was saying, you know, when she was in a relationship, she was happy. When she wasn't, she kind of moped around. You know, so what do you think contributed to this? Like exactly, like what amounts of things could have contributed to this?
Well, I think she, I mean, I'm not really a psychologist, but her growing up, I think made her depressed, basically. I mean, she was basically, she once said she had to grow herself up because her mother was always working. Her father wasn't there. She was trying ineffectively to protect her mother from her father, and her brothers were absent. So, you know, the neighborhood she lived in was fine. It's just that she had no family. So she was basically an orphan. You know, she'd eat at home and stuff, but that was it. I think that made her depressed all her life. People, even when she was at the top of her game, I think Mae James Holler said that she always seemed depressed. Underneath was sadness. To get rid of that, I guess you have to see a shrink or take antidepressants, and even that probably wouldn't work, but I'm not an expert in the field. That's what explains it, I think. Because she certainly did well in life. I mean, that first, in terms of work, that first trajectory where she went right up and became a star at 20, international music star at 21, with the Beatles fawning over her and everyone else failing to compete with her, was pretty good.
Right. And so, you know, of course it could have been, well, not of course, but it's possible that it could have been, you know, related to regret at leaving Motown, like still like constantly searching, you know, for what she, you know, searching for that spotlight, searching for what she needed. As we said, she's a perfectionist. She doesn't play second fiddle. She, you know, she only goes for the best.
Right.
And so with that in her head, you know, she probably, it kind of put her in a bad place. But a question for you as an author as well. You know, human beings obviously have a natural bias, you know, and as a nonfiction writer, how do you manage this, you know, when writing about someone?
The bias I had wasn't until I learned about her. I mean, I knew who she was, and I liked some of her music, but I think it's not a bias, but a conclusion after studying her and talking to 100 or so of her friends, associates, husbands. I became more favorable toward her than I might have otherwise. And I think that's reflected in the book, because she kept going in spite of all these things that happened to her. I mean, she didn't give it up. And you know, a lot of former Motown stars, they got one or two hits, then they got in a dispute with Gordy, and then I interviewed them for my first book about Motown. They had normal jobs again. You know, they were working in gas stations or drugstores or something. I remember this because that's where I interviewed them, and that's fine. But I admired Mary's determination to keep going, right. Even when she was supporting, just by touring and singing her old Motown song, she was supporting 2 families with children in both of them. By the way, speaking of that shows her real determination. She married Cecil Womack of the Womack brothers, later the Valentinos. They're the brothers of Bobby Womack. Cecil just died last week, but she married him, stayed with him for 11 years, and had 3 children with him. And then, I think mainly because she thought Cecil was holding back her career, she divorced him and married his brother, Curtis, while they were both alive. Now, I've written 7 books, but I've never encountered denunciations of people as severe as when I talked to them and asked them if they thought what they thought of her going from one brother to another. Because, you know, in other cultures, lots of other cultures in the world, if there are 2 brothers and one's married, one's not, and the one who's married dies, the second brother is expected to marry the first, the wife of the widow, the other brother, to protect her. If he isn't, he gets ostracized or basically given the cold shoulder by everyone who knows him. Here, it's like, well, people were screaming at me, incest, perversion. She shouldn't have gone from one brother to another. And this is 25 years after she married him, so they must have been really upset at the time. But she nevertheless just brushed it aside and stayed with Curtis, her third husband, until she died and had another kid with him. And actually, the Womack family is very interesting because Cecil and the daughter of Sam Cooke, Linda Cooke, became a big hit as Womack and Womack. And then even though Cecil had lost his wife to Curtis, hard to keep up with this, he hired them all or asked them to join him as background singers. So the whole Womack Wells family, including the two brothers who had been married or were married to the same woman, their children and all their nephews and nieces, they were called the Womack congregation, and they backed up Cecil and Linda Cooke Womack. By the way, just for your information, Mary and Cecil were known as the first Womack and Womack by some people. The second Womack and Womack were Cecil and Linda. I was going to make one of those family charts, like they used to make in old Russian novels, Duke married, but I couldn't do it. It was too complicated.
This is the soap opera I was referring to. Yeah, so as a final comment, I'd just like to say, her refusal to quit, her relentlessness, that's really inspiring, especially to someone coming from someone who is a vocalist as well, and trying to find my own place in the world following, my time in school and everything. It's really inspiring to see that, despite her countless obstacles, including betrayal from, some friends, some business partners, even by her own health, she had throat cancer, which is the worst for a vocalist. I think that's incredibly, that just goes to show how, she just wouldn't settle. I think maybe Cecil Womack was the only time, the only instance of her settling, because she did say she wanted Curtis, from the beginning. Yeah. She did that, but aside from that, she's a very inspiring lady, and thank you very much for, writing this biography and enlightening us to her life and her world.
Well, thanks. It's nice of you to say that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm interested in your process as a biographer. You have all these interviews, all this information. How do you organize it? Do you put things in the computer by category? It just seems like a lot of information to organize.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount. I have huge file drawers full of Mary Wells information. Well, I try to organize it around incidents in her life. And what people said about each incident. That was one way to do it. And also the periods in which they knew her. Some people knew her only for the first half of her life, basically while she was with Motown. And some people didn't. People like Will Porter and other people in the book didn't join her until the last third of her life. So in some ways it organized itself just chronologically. Some of them knew her all along, and they went from being, say, her husband to being a far-off observer. So that was difficult, because then you have to compare each story. The only fair way to do it is what I did, I think, and that is in lots of instances, if you interview enough people, they all basically agree on what happened, and then you just put in the different opinions about what happened. Or if there's basic disagreement on what actually took place, then you just put them both in and let the reader decide. I mean, there's one point near the end of the book where she sued Motown for the second time, and her then husband, Curtis, talked about a whole incident in which Gordy allegedly offered her $1 million to get off TV and stop criticizing him. And her lawyer in that case says that absolutely didn't happen, it couldn't have happened. So there's no way of, Mary hadn't been interviewed about this. So I just had to put them together. Cecil said this, and Steve said this. That's the only way.
Did you transcript of the tapes, or did you just take notes as you were re-listening to it? It just seems like hours and hours. If you were interviewing 200 people, that's a lot of hours of information.
Right. Well, for most of them, most of the interviews were only of moderate length, but the two with, well, I forgot to mention, if you hadn't read the book, you may not know, Mary was interviewed on her deathbed for 4 hours by a guy who I got the interviews from. And he taped them and gave them to me we made a deal, but so the book is partly based on 4 hours of Mary talking about her whole life on her deathbed, which makes it a much more substantial book, I think, than it would be otherwise. So I transcribed those tapes, and then I went down to West Virginia to see the husband who stayed with her longest, Curtis Womack, and I interviewed him for another 4 hours, with him talking all the time, and in Mary's case, she was talking all the time. So I spent weeks transcribing all those and then indexing them. If you want to have a real life of adventure, be a writer. You used to just stand behind your typewriter or sit at your typewriter. Now you just stare blankly at the word processor while you're transcribing all this stuff. It's worth it in the end, but at some point, you know, while I was in page 300 of the Curtis Womack interview, transcribing it got a little weird. So, it's just like Mary, you know, it's the thing you have to do for art, or a lot of people have to do. She would be living on the West Coast, and she'd get a invitation to do a concert on the East Coast. She was so intent on, for not much money, she's so intent on keeping her profile high and keeping her music in circulation. She'd drive from LA to, I think it was Charleston, to do the concert. You know, that's a lot of hours just on the road. Get someone to take care of her kids, you know, send money to other people. It was like, you have to be absolutely determined to keep it going for a long time. I mean, I know some people have it really easy. They start off really big, and then many of them are big for the rest of their lives, but that's like assuming you'll win the lottery, which is, I'm not sure how well they do, because a lot of them then, they have nowhere to go, and they become heavy drug addicts or screwed up in some other way. So,
why was she not able to get reestablished? Was it because the music was changing? Was it because she was no longer viewed as being marketable? In that time, the music was going in so many different directions. Was part of it her drug? You know, I didn't really get enough from that program to know if it was her drugs or she was, you know, was the cancer there then? Do you know about?
Well, I've got a whole different explanation.
Okay. One of my questions too, actually.
Okay. At Motown, she started out zero and went to the top of the charts, more or less straight up, or like that. Then the other companies, she went to Atlantic, Jubilee, Reprise, a lot of other record companies. She'd go pretty high on the chart with her first song, and then she'd fall off the chart. Then at the next company, she'd go way back on the chart and then fall off the chart. Chart research is really something. Talk about detailed stuff like that. But what I finally came to the conclusion that it was promotion. You know, there are two things that record companies do. One is publicity and advertising and marketing, where, you know, they put out posters and commercials and everything, try to get articles in the newspapers. The other one's promotion. This was in the days when DJs controlled what music people heard. This is not true anymore today, I don't think. But there are promotion departments, and the guys in the promotion department go around and let's get real. They socialize with the DJs, or they give them money or women or parties or vacations just to get them to play the records. And at that time, in the 60s and 70s, even the 80s, until fairly recently, race was a big problem, because she went to white record companies, which were very anxious to get a lot of money out of her, which meant they wanted to make her a hit. But their promo departments were all white. The DJs who played the music were all black. I don't think the whites had any problem with doing it, but they just didn't, there was no way to socialize with them. You know what I mean? So it was that really caused her. You know, Motown had a black promo department, and they could socialize with the DJs. The other companies didn't. That I really think is what happens, and that I think shows in the chart, because one of the things that Motown promo guys did, you can look at it because each week is on is on the chart. With the hits at Motown, you'd see they go way up in the beginning, and then as they started to fall off, the Motown promo guys would go out on another tour of all the DJs and do all sorts of things for them, and then you'd see it go up again, you know, and they keep it like jerking up as they gave them more stuff, basically. And then it finally would drop off, but long after everyone in the world had heard it 30 times. The other songs, the promo departments weren't able to do it. So that's my explanation. Because some of her hits were very, very good. Dear Lover, The Doctor, there were lots of them. I thought they were excellent. Gigolo really made it. That was in the late 80s, I think. It was a great song. It had a 12-minute version and a 7-minute version. It was terrific. Went to #1 on the disco chart. But then the same thing happened.
That's what I was wondering.
Right.
I realize that the subject of the music business is, you know, a little bigger than we can really take on, because it's a big topic, but there's a big difference between those days and today, and one of them is sort of the map of the music business is very different, and it's ethnically very different now. And I just wondered if if writing these 2 books about these 2 singers had given you some new understanding of how music has changed, how the popular music scene has changed from that day to this. Could it happen today?
What, a big star like Barry?
Well, I said it's kind of vague.
Oh, well.
What's the change?
The real answer is I really don't know, because Mary's career, it died when she died, which was in '92. And that, I think, was before the biggest changes. Because the internet didn't become a mass medium, according to all the philosophers, or whatever you want to call them, until '94. So, and that's when this stuff really started happening. I'm hoping to write another book on Rick James, who was, now think about it, he was I know he's got quite a life, but Mary was the one of the first solo superstars for the company, the first female solo superstar, and he was basically the last one, and the last solo superstar, and he got into, he probably moved into that era, so I'll have to figure out what they were doing then.
I guess what I'm thinking about is the term crossover artist. Is that a term that's really specific to an era that's gone now?
I think they've merged.
That's
yes,
right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking.
There were some interesting people before Motown who would cross over for a couple of records and then sort of be forced back across the river, or they couldn't sell after the first couple. That was Motown. That's why, there are no other record company. If you take any other record company, there's been no more than 2 books written about them. I'd almost give my life on it. No more than 2 books written about Columbia, RCA, Atlantic, Stax, anything. There have been 180 books written about the Motown Record Company, including my 3. And that's why, because it changed the whole popular music scene. It merged black and white music permanently. I guess you could go back, but I don't see why anyone would. Well, they couldn't, because they're surrounded by artistic influences. So James and Mary Wells and Flo Ballard were all either the people who helped with the merger or were beneficiaries of it in James's case.
I would say the crossover today is more in terms of genre than demographics. I think crossover in the Motown days was getting the white folks to buy the black music, and I think today it's more getting the country star to be on the pop charts. So
right.
Crossover, I think, is still a word that's used, but I think it means genre rather than demographics.
Oh, if you mean that, I don't know that much about it, but I think you're right.
Well, I just looked at the Grammys. Oh,
right.
That's my opinion.
Well, one thing I noticed, there's even just looking at Rick James a bit, there were so many different kinds of music now. It's like each one breaks down into different fields, you know, funk, punk, pop country, and, you know, I'm saying what you're saying, basically. I don't know if you'd call that crossover, but I guess you can.
Everything's kind of derived from everything
Right,
else.
right.
I tend to agree with what you talk about crossover, depending upon what era you were in. Crossover back during that time was to go from blacks crossing over, trying to get the money from the white population, and it was pretty much that way. But today it seems to be the crossover is going from one genre to another one, like jazz. Like you see a lot of the gospel going into some of the hip hop, using that to bring, you know, audiences back in. So crossover is used a lot of ways to bring younger people into older and to mix the different kinds of artists.
That's very true. And by the way, you mentioned that it was to get the whites to buy black music, but it was all, I think Gordy's real genius was getting both groups to buy the music. I think Curtis Womack says in the book that he was alarmed when he first heard My Guy because it sounded like Patti Page, who was a very white vocalist. And I think she and those other, he said it sounded to him like, how much is that doggy in the window? And he was standing around going, oh no, black people will never buy this, we're finished, you know. But they did, so. I mean, the crossover is to the merger, not just jumping over.
Was that not Barry's, wasn't that really pretty much Barry's intention was to bridge that? Because the hard-hitting stuff, that's why Atlantic was one place and Stax and Volt ended up over here. You know, the Otis Reddings and the Sam and Dave, that was another whole, that was guttural, that was that raw, hard-hitting, you know, on the one kind of beat. And Motown was, you know, a lot of people use that terminology. It was like white black music. But it had this appeal, and I think that was where Barry, it seems like, because I grew up on that stuff, and it just seemed like that's where he was coming from, was to really try to bridge and make the music universal. So it didn't have that hard edge. And he brought the Funk Brothers in, you know, who were jazz musicians, moonlighted as jazz. They actually moonlighted at Motown, but they were jazz musicians. And they brought that little bit of a softer edge than that hard-driven Stax, Volt, Atlantic stuff. And I'm just thankful that you know, that music was there, because it did bring everybody together musically, at least, even though the prejudice was still there.
Oh no, that was his great achievement. I think it was because he wanted the money from everybody. But he also wanted the. I think that was basically his motive, let's be honest. And he was very pleased, obviously very pleased at what happened. You know, but though you can see this, what you're both talking about, or all of you talking about, in Mary's career, because the first song that she only wrote one song herself. That's right. Bye Bye Baby, that's right. And I think it was significant for two reasons. One was the one you just mentioned. That was a very old-fashioned, raw, black female singer style song. Very hard-hitting. I mean, Big Mama Thornton could have sung that without any problem, because she had no other models to draw from. So that was, and then the girl group started soon after that and lightened everything up in musical terms. So Gordy and Robinson were starting the process of diversifying the music, or crossing over. Also, in terms of her personality, that was the only song she wrote herself. And if you listen to the words, what it said was, that's right. It says all that. It says, you know, you walked out on me, I'm really unhappy. But then it says, if you come back, I'm not gonna let you back in. I'm moving on. So that's very, it was just like Barry's song about money, that's what I want. She's cut off the past. She's going to move on, whatever happens. It was a song about determination, partly about determination. So it was significant on two levels, I thought.
What more can you tell us about Barry Wells and the Beatles?
And what?
The Beatles.
Oh, well, The Beatles were kind of interesting because at that time, no black people to speak of lived in England. So they certainly heard no black music. And the Beatles had heard it only because they lived in Liverpool, and sailors would buy the records in New York or whatever U.S. port they went to, and then bring them back and play them as like a curiosity. So John Lennon's first reaction to hearing one of these black American songs, when he goes, "Why can't I sing like that?" That was, and they were all thinking, "Geez, this is it. We got to do it like this." And so then when they adopted, they went to the U.S. They went to see Mary in concert, and they adopted her as their sort of song goddess, their idol, you know, American Idol, I guess. And then they invited her to tour with them as the opening act in their tour of Great Britain. It was very funny as she describes it, and I forgot I have these tapes here, but it says she'd say they'd all come into her dressing room, all 4 Beatles would troop into her dressing room and sit in the back while she was getting ready for her part of the show, and they'd watch her like, you know, gee, look, she's eating a cookie now. No, now she's taking a drink of water. You know, they'd never seen anyone like her before. So, and then Paul tried to style her hair like the Beatles, you know, give her bangs and everything, and she let him do it for a while. It was kind of weird. But and then the Beatles allegedly adopted a lot of black styles into their music. I mean, that high falsetto that they did was unknown in England before. That was, you know, I can't do it, but you know what I mean. I don't even want to try. But that's, yeah, they were really, they were unbelievable fans of hers.
She knocked them off the charts, right?
Yes, that's right. Right, actually, technically, let me think. Louis, they had the chart. I remember lying out at a swimming pool in the 60s and listening to the top 10, which were played repeatedly on the radio. And I listened to the top 7, they were all Beatles songs. I remember thinking, what the, you know, this is ridiculous. This is America. They can't do it. Then finally, Louis Armstrong got into #1 with, I can't remember the name of the song. It was number, what? Hello, Dolly, that's right. And then Mary knocked him out with My Guy. So in a sense, she knocked them off the chart. Louis should have abandoned her, but the Beatles, neither one was because they thought it was good. I talked to this guy in England who went to the Beatles show and saw Mary come out, and he was flabbergasted. He was 17 at the time, and his girlfriend was sitting on his lap, which shows some interest on her part, I guess, but for the whole concert. So he got in trouble with her because when Mary came out, he was just flabbergasted. He'd never seen a black person or a black singer or many female singers before. This was just like, you know, he sat there and wouldn't talk to her. And he had some problems.
Could you play some of the audio?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
You could hear her interview. Might be a good place to end our...
All right, here she's talking about her purpose in life. Let's see if this works.
You quote this in this book. I don't give a damn if they think I'm crazy or what. The Lord built me like a machine. And that was to be an entertainer, a performer, a sex symbol, or whatever. And that was for just that. I don't think he even thought about me getting married, or being a wife, or a mother. A lot of those things I had to learn myself.
She sounds like that because she died of throat cancer, and that was probably because she smoked 2 packs a day since she was 16. But let me give you another one of these here.
I believe that God made me special. Listen, he gave me a voice to sing. He gave me the looks. He gave me the legs to be graceful.
You said Cole used to comb your hair?
Yeah.
After every show or before every?
You know, when you're kids,
yeah,
you don't take time out to say like, well, is this right or wrong? He just said like, why don't you wear some bangs like we got our hair fixed?
This is the Beatles.
You know, let me comb it for you. This is the latest British style. And I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said, well, why don't you wear some bangs? He said, well, you know, I don't like to wear bangs. I said So he just picked up the brush and started brushing it, and I just let him.
Who was George Harrison?
He'd come there and he'd just sit back and look.
He never did
No, he's probably one of the most intense one of them all now that I'm older. Because he would just sit back and just watch.
As you may recall, George Harrison was the shy Beatle. I mean, I don't know if you recall that from the old days. Let me just give you one or two more of these, and then here's about moving from one brother to another.
They asked me, they said, did you know what you were doing when you did that? I said, of course I did. And I told them exactly what had happened. That two brothers had fell in love with me. One I was divorced and the other one was coming in my life. And I was totally confused and upset and in a lot of pain. So I took the pills to alleviate all of that. And they thought it made sense even though it was wrong. But they thought that I needed to see a psychiatrist. But when I got through telling them what was going on, they felt like it made some sense.
Did you see a psychiatrist?
Did I say one? No. No, I didn't.
Their story's so long, she tried suicide twice while switching from one brother to another because the condemnation was so great. And by the way, she also, besides that of the gunfight, she was also kidnapped at one point, which is also in the book. But
was she really kidnapped? I thought that was...
No, she's told a story about. I'm trying to keep the suspense up. She told a story about being kidnapped. But you ruined it.
Sorry. We know how it ends.
That's right. Wait a
Were
minute.
the two brothers condemned or only Mary Wells? Because, there's that double standard.
Oh, well, certainly Curtis was the one she went to. The other one was sympathized with. But they all made up in the end after a couple of years of, I suppose, hard feelings. Let me just give you one more. I'm trying to find a good one here.
I'm gonna be honest with you, each guy that I was with, I believed I loved him very deeply. Each one. That's why I'm scared of any relationship now. Because I'm getting older and I cannot deal with it.
You got really fun of love.
But they all the same one, I believe.
Maybe they're all the same personalities. You ever think of that?
Oh, they are. Sometimes I think they were the same man. Spirit on the inside.
That's interesting because of the song Two Lovers.
That's right.
Right?
Well, Bye Bye Baby, and then Two Lovers, My Guy, and they all fit in. It's really amazing. She was laughing like that, in spite of having throat cancer. She was obviously laughing hysterically because the guy that was interviewing her thought she was very attractive even while dying. So when she said, I don't think I'm going to, have any more boyfriends or something like that, he was going like, so that's what she was going, oh, stop. At one point, let's see, she had a crush on her doctor at one point. She had a lot of little crushes. At the, this interviewer asked her if he could, what she thought of Curtis Womack, her husband at the time, or her last husband, visiting her in the hospital. She said, oh, it's nice, but he's blocking my action. She and the doctor never got together. But you see, she did do a song, The Doctor, before this, in which she talked, it was like lovers as doctor and nurse or something. It was really very weird.
Well, on that note, I think we'll leave the rest of that to our imaginations. And I thank you all for coming, and if you have a chance to thank anybody you know associated with the state legislature, please thank them for funding this series through the CT Humanities. It's always important to say thank you, so keep it going. And thank you all for coming, and let's thank Erica for a wonderful job. Thank you. No, you, after you.
It's nothing